Okay, welcome to part 2 of chapter 3, conversation about the play, the script, the story. Here's where we left off with part 1, 6 parts of the drama. Now let's break these 6 parts down more specifically. Plot. Plot is the summary of the play's incidents. Do not confuse plot with story, especially in more contemporary styles of drama. The story of the play and the plot don't always line up. And when I mean line up, I mean sequentially. Plot is the organization of all elements into a meaningful pattern. It's the overall structure of the play. It's the sequence of events. So, A happens, then B, then C, then D, etc. The most common plot structures are episodic, which moves from scene to scene. There is an early point of attack, treats characters or concerns, creates a broad perspective. And then there's this sense of climactic plot structure, which relates back to cause and effect. Often there's a later point of attack in this structure, which creates a sense of compression or dramatic tension. Let's look at this more specifically. Plot. In the beginning, plot establishes place, occasion, character, mood, theme, internal logic through exposition. Right? Exposition sets up all the information we need to know about earlier events, about the identity and relationships of characters, etc. Now this takes us to the term I used in the previous slide, point of attack. Point of attack is the moment at which the story is taken up. So not the plot, but the story. An early point of attack, you don't need as much exposition to explain how we got to where we are. With a late point of attack, you need much more exposition. If we look at this, we could talk about it in the context of Oedipus. In Oedipus, the story really begins, the play really begins on the last day of Oedipus's rule as the king of Thebes. And so there needs to be a great deal of exposition to explain to the audience how we got to where we are, the relationships of the characters, the story so far. Okay, moving on. All right, so we've talked about point of attack. Now let's talk about the inciting incident. The inciting incident is an occurrence that sets the main action in motion, which leads us to the major dramatic question. Bum, bum, bum. This is the central question that drives the action forward. For an example, what will the character do now? That doesn't seem too major, but it's fundamental. This question can change as the action progresses. So it's kind of, write your own story kind of novels, right? When you get to a certain point in the story, you have to choose. If you go this way or if you do this thing, then this thing will happen, right? The characters all the way through the play have those same sorts of struggles. If they make a choice, A, then it will lead to situation B. If they choose C, then it will lead to D, etc. So, for those that love diagrams, here's a diagram that illustrates this exposition component, early point of attack versus late point of attack. We have the inciting incident and the rising action. Rising action is a term we haven't used yet. Now, the rising action, this is as the events begin to unfold, as the plot thickens, as they say. And these cause and effect kinds of moments begin to transpire. In the middle of the plot, we have complications. This is any new element that changes the direction of the action. Okay? This series of complications is, as you noticed in the diagram, called rising action. Part of rising action is discovery. Any new information of significant importance that alters the direction of the action. Discovery is the substance of most complications. And again, when you're looking at Oedipus as sort of our fundamental model, this is a play that Aristotle referred to. You will see how discovery plays a very important role in these complications. Near the middle, near the end of the middle, I guess, you have a climax. Rising action culminates in a climax. It's the highest point of interest or suspense. In a play that has multiple acts, often you have a climax that creates sort of a cliffhanger effect at the end of the act. And it creates the what if, what's going to happen next kind of suspense for the audience that brings them back into the theater after the intermission. Climax is often accompanied or preceded by a crisis. Right? Crisis can cause climax. Crisis is defined as a discovery or event that leads to the climax and determines the outcome of the action. Now, when we near the end of the play, we have what's called the resolution, or in pompous French terms, the denouement. Which is and that's what denouement means, is unraveling or untying. Okay, the dramatic question has been resolved, and sometimes the denouement comes very quickly. Think about all those classic Agatha Christie stories, or those mystery shows on TV that were very popular 10, 20 years ago, where suddenly the detective will unfold all of the clues and explain who the killer is, etc. This is a pretty simple way of explaining the denouement, but it makes sense. Now, there are other attributes to the plot, things like subplot, which are events or actions of a secondary interest. And as we look at different dramatic forms and we're reading plays from different periods, you'll discover that sometimes subplots are allowed or preferred, and other times the subplot is discouraged. More charts. This kind of is a visual example of how the whole plot structure works, right? You have the exposition, point of attack, followed quickly by the inciting incident. Then you have the rising action, which are your complications, right? Your discoveries. Climax, and then following that climax or crisis moment, you have the denouement, or the resolution. We're going to move through the rest of these kind of quickly so we don't run out of time on these screencasts. They are limited to 15-minute segments. Anyway, character. So, character deals with the individual persons who are the tellers, the participants in the story. Right? Characterization, anything that delineates a person or differentiates them from other persons in that play. And there are actually 4 levels of characterization that the actor needs to consider, that the playwright considers as they craft the story, the directors look at, everybody involved with the play looks at these basic 4 levels of characterization when they are crafting the complete theatrical experience. First level is psychological or physical or biological, right? Gender, age, size, race, appearance, etc. Then there's the societal elements, the economic status of the character, the religious affiliations and relationships. Then we have the psychological aspects, their habitual responses, their desires, their motives, and then their moral character, how their morals and ethics are reflected by their choices and decisions as they act through the play. How is character revealed? Well, we see it in stage direction. We see it in the preferences or other materials. We see it through what a specific character says to other characters. Sometimes even more revealing is what others say about that character. But most telling is through that character's action. All right, and here's a little challenge for you in this slide. Picture yourself as a character and how those 4 elements unfold for you. Thought, the principal ideas of the play. These are the themes, the arguments, the meaning of the action. Meaning is suggested in many different ways, through relationships, ideas associated with either unsympathetic or sympathetic characters, conflicts and their resolution, and devices, such as spectacle, music, and song. Meaning is usually implied rather than stated directly. And meaning is very subjective in many cases. Although a play may imply or state a meaning, there is no single or correct interpretation for each play. There are options for multiple interpretations depending on how an individual audience member perceives what they've experienced. Okay. Sound and spectacle. Now, Aristotle talked about sound in aspects of diction and music. Slides here break them down a little differently, but I think we'll be able to manage this, okay? Let's move forward. So, first element of sound is diction. This is Aristotle's word, which relates to language. The purpose of diction, obviously, is to impart information, to clarify characterization, direct attention to important plot elements, reveal themes, establish tone and mood, establish logic, and set a tempo and a rhythm. So, here's a question for you. How is effective diction judged? Well, it has certain appropriateness to character, situation, internal logic, and a type of play. The language needs to make sense of the context of the play. Music, on the other hand, are all pattern sounds, including the sounds of the actors' voices. But we're not talking about the words they speak. We're talking about how the actor uses their voice as an instrument. So, pitch, stress, volume, tempo, duration, and the quality of their voice. Music being all patterned sounds could be incidental songs, background music, integrated song, or integrated instrumental accompaniment, as well as sound effects. Purpose of music in a production is similar, really, to other elements of a production. It helps establish mood, characterization, helps suggest ideas. It can compress characterization. It can compress exposition. It leads to variety, and it can add pleasure to the theatrical experience. Finally, spectacle. Spectacle are all the visual elements of the production, which include the movement of the characters within the 3D environment of the stage, the spatial relationships of the characters within that three-dimensional environment, the lighting, the settings, the costumes, the properties, all of the special effects. All of these factor into spectacle. So, now we're going to move on to forms in drama. This is our segue into part 3 of chapter 3. Thank you for sticking with me.